It is potentially very bad for the Conservatives.
Before we get into some of the details, I just wanted to kind of get just a start with a sort of general sense from the three of you about just how you're feeling about the general election campaign right now. I'm going to start with Jon, because Jon and I were just kind of confessing, and we are political geeks. We love politics inside out. It's what quickens the pulse for us. But we've both kind of confessed to each other, it feels like it's been dragging on a bit, doesn't it, Jon?
Too long. One of Rishi Sunak's errors, error number one was probably going through this July election. Error number two was a 6 week...
Not getting an umbrella.
Oh, yes, all right. That was which was first? Number one, I suppose, was the date. Number two was no brolly. Number three, the campaign is too long. I was in the day he called the election on the Wednesday, it was the 22nd of May. I was in the central lobby in Parliament interviewing MPs, and some of the old veterans, particularly MPs standing down, the older ones, were saying, Margaret only had 3 or 4 week campaigns. And I read a piece about this a few days ago, and that's right. If you go back to the Thatcher election campaigns, John Major in 92, they were shorter campaigns. And in the spin room at York University on Thursday night, the chat amongst a lot of political correspondents was the campaign is starting to get a bit boring. We've had the manifestos. The politicians are just saying the same things over and over again. And the reason I think it's a mistake, Mr. Sunak has made a mistake, is the long campaign is not doing the Tories any favours. If you look at the polls, the Tory vote is the one that's going down. Labour's vote is more or less staying where it was, round about the 40% mark, although it's dipped a bit below in some of the recent polls. It's the Tory vote that's going down. Things are going from bad to worse. And now we've got this betting scandal, which is Rishi Sunak's Partygate.
Yeah, and we'll come on to the betting scandal. Also, Jon, you were just reminding me that under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, campaigns were 25 days.
25 working days.
25 working days.
But they ditched... Do you know what I've been thinking the last, all this fuss about when the election was going to be? I actually think the Fixed Term Parliament Act was not a bad thing. You could argue whether it should be 4 years or 5, and perhaps it might be better if it was 4 rather than 5. But it ends all the uncertainty and the messing about.
And the will he, won't he sort of thing. Miranda, what are your impressions of the campaign so far? And do you want to reflect on anything that Jon's just said?
Well, I just agree with you about the level of kind of exhaustion at this point. I feel punch drunk by it. In fact, not bored actually, Jon, but punch drunk. Because just when you think the Tory party campaign can't get more chaotic and reach a further low point, it surprises us all on the downside. But I always try to get through election campaigns with samosas. I think I'm now sort of like, well, it's my favourite snack food. It's portable, you see.
Meat or vegetable?
It's vegetarian, so exactly. I try and kid myself it's healthy. But I think I'm now kind of 2/3 samosas and chocolate. And so actually my at this point, I think, we've all probably not been pacing ourselves as we should. But if we feel punch drunk and a bit exhausted, what must the principals feel like? What must those party leaders, particularly the Tory cabinet, as they look at potential wipeout of 2/3 of their fellows around the table.
We'll come on to the question time event. I did think Rishi Sunak did look very deflated in that event. The only person that
Which
doesn't...
one?
The question time one on Thursday.
Well, I thought he looked deflated, actually, in the Sky News event, which, of course, was a few days after the D-Day fiasco. That's really knocked his confidence, I think.
It has...
I mean, the point about those programmes is, both the Sky News one and the BBC Question Time, is the audience have been really hostile towards the Prime Minister. They've been this Question Time event, they were pretty challenging, actually, to all the four leaders.
I thought they were really good. We'll come on to that. I thought they were
feisty.
We're going to come on and do a bit of a proper, full analysis of that. I was out and about a lot in Scotland last week, and a lot of people know that there's election campaign on, but then a lot of people are still really meh about politics at the moment. Lots of people are saying, I just don't know if I'm going to bother voting, and I'm not feeling any enthusiasm. I mean, a lot of people were saying, to be fair, I probably will end up voting Labour, but only because I'm voting for people. I'm going on who I don't want to vote for as a process of elimination. Do you think that's going to be a factor, Jon, the sort of just general menace of the campaign?
Well, there's an old saying, isn't there, that oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. There's no doubt there is a mood to get rid of the Tories, and I think there will be tactical voting in a lot of seats. an anti-Tory tactical vote. That's why I think the Lib Dems may do pretty well. I think the Lib Dems are probably on course to get the sort of number of seats that they had when Charles Kennedy and Paddy Ashdown were leading the party. Yes, there's a real anti-Tory vote. I mean, the worry for Labour, of course, is all this talk about a supermajority, a landslide, a blank check, as Mr. Sunak calls it, may persuade or may lead some people who were perhaps going to vote Labour to think, oh, well, Labour are going to win, I'm going to stay at home. That's what they're worried about in Labour HQ.
And Miranda, the other thing which I think has been really interesting about this election is I feel we've reached kind of peak poll hysteria. Like this election has been more about polls than policy, and just the kind of sheer sort of level of these MRP polls coming up. I think it was 3 polls on, was it Tuesday or Wednesday night that came out. Do you think we've gone a bit over the top with the polling in this campaign?
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, the data is really, really interesting, and I think some of the kind of more detailed breakdowns of who's abandoning the Tories for which opposition party and why is genuinely fascinating, because it tells you a lot about the voters and about the way the country's changing. But I think these sort of, just repeated MRP polls, it doesn't actually tell you very much. And there's still, 12 days to go now. And actually, as Jon was saying, the scale of the sort of anticipated win for Starmer could actually change the result, right? So there is a danger in repeating polls as if they are fact. They're a snapshot, and they've become a more detailed, sophisticated snapshot, but that's what it is. And it doesn't actually tell you how people are going to behave in 12 weeks' time. I mean, I agree with you, sort of when you're out and about. I was out and about in the northwest of England last week, and, there was one stake board up that we saw in the whole day out. And that sort of sense of disengagement from the campaign, it could well depress the turnout quite considerably. And that also would affect the results. So I agree with you about the hysteria over the polls. I think everyone just wants to be in on the act.
Yeah.
There's a feeling that the data is where it's at. But, we all know with our kind of frightening decades of, we put all our decades
our
of
kind of
experience
Miss
working sort
Havisham levels of
exactly.
Miss Havisham levels of sort of
Exactly.
time in this game.
Well, we know it's a really human business, politics, and the data is an ingredient in the story.
Yeah.
Go on, Miranda, you first.
No, I was just going to say, Jon, there was a wonderful satirical tweet from the Scottish columnist Ewan McColm saying, new MRP poll, 3,000 seats for Labour, minus 50 for the Tories. That seemed like a fair summary of where we were all at.
I think I was going to say, in defence of opinion polls, we at Sky News we're cooperating with YouGov, and so we have had so far during the campaign 2. And we've got, I believe, one more, which I think is in the last week of the campaign. You like this one? On Sky News the other day, Mark Austin, a veteran, I hope he doesn't mind me calling him that, Sky News presenter, said to me, first question during a live when I was actually talking about the Ipsos poll. So what does MRP stand for then? So I'm going to tell you now, it's multi-level regression and post-stratification. No wonder we just call it MRP.
That sounds like kind of thing you need to microdose to understand.
Just continuing my defence of them, I think it's not that we, individual broadcasters or individual newspapers, do a lot of them. For example, I think we're only doing 3 during the campaign. But it's just that there are lots of pollsters and there are lots of news organisations carrying out polls. I call them mega polls because they are 20,000 or so.
Or Best for Britain was 42,000.
Yeah, enormous. I mean, I think back. I mean, a lot of Tories say, "Oh, let's hope it's like '92 when John Major won with a majority of 21." I remember that one. I was at the Daily Express in those days. And that we had the last poll on the Wednesday. And you remember Neil Kinnock was ahead, and the polls then gradually narrowed until the last one was neck and neck. And of course, Major won. But those polls were sort of 1,000 or 2,000. These are massive polls, 20,000 people, I suppose, because it's all online these days. Whereas in the old days, I can remember covering general elections when you'd bump into a pollster knocking on doors.
You're back. I mean, the one thing just about, these MRP polls, and as you say, that the scale of them is vast. But as other people have made the point, they sometimes can't pick up, specific things that are happening in individual constituencies as well. Or like I saw one MRP poll that actually had Labour on quite a low result in Scotland, and I've just come back from Scotland, and I know in my bones that doesn't feel right. So again, as Jon said, you've got to just take these polls with a bit of a pinch of salt. But the other point, I suppose, with the polls is, look, polls have got it wrong. On Brexit, loads of polls said that we were not going to leave the EU. We went into the poll with people saying Theresa May's going to smash Jeremy Corbyn. She lost her majority. Hillary Clinton was absolutely meant to beat Donald Trump. There was no way that Donald Trump was. So polls can get it wrong. But I think what's been interesting over the course of the last Parliament and over the course of the last few years is that we've had a chance to kind of test the veracity of these polls, because we've had a lot of by-elections and local elections. And it does look like the polls are kind of in line with when people go to the ballot box. The polls do look like they're broadly in line.
And they are much more sophisticated than when I was at the Daily Express in the 1990s, for example, 30 or so years ago. They're much more sophisticated, and no doubt the pollsters will say they're more accurate. We'll see.
Now, another big story that came up at the debate or the event, the Question Time event, was the story about gambling. This has been a really big story. We've covered it a lot on Times Radio this week. People are calling it Gamblegate. And Michael Gove has just done a very interesting interview with the Sunday Times, which has just dropped on the website now. And he is likening Gamblegate, or this betting scandal, to Partygate. He is saying that it's a very, very bad look, likening the row to Partygate. Gove said it looks like one rule for them and one rule for us. That's the most potentially damaging thing, the perception that we operate outside the rules that we set for others. That was damaging at the time of Partygate, and it's damaging here. Michael Gove goes on to say, if you're in a privileged position close to the Prime Minister at the heart of a political operation and you use inside information to make additional money for yourself, that is just not acceptable. You are in effect securing an advantage against people who are betting entirely fairly and without that knowledge. Jon, how damaging is this scandal?
Very, and Michael Gove is absolutely right. I agree with him. I wonder if he would have been quite so candid if he was still a candidate in this election. They must be absolutely jittery is an understatement in the Tory High Command about more names coming out. I was covering this story, actually doing live broadcasts on this from the spin room in the run up to the debate on Thursday night at York University, and a source, shall I say, in the gambling industry, I said, "Are there going to be more names?" "Oh yes, definitely." So I think they perhaps know that there are more names going to come out, and that's why they're so nervous. But yes, it is like Partygate, and it's one of those scandals where more information emerges, drip, 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 if you like, over a few days. In this case, it is potentially very bad for the Conservatives.
One thing that a lot of my listeners pointed out yesterday was there does seem to be some double standards, because the alleged close protection police officer who is allegedly caught up in this, he's now got the police involved, and he's been, I think, suspended or removed from his role.
Removed from his role.
Removed from his role, but the candidates are still being allowed to candidate to be candidates. And I spoke with a Conservative candidate, or a Welsh office minister yesterday, who was saying, no, it's different. They have to have natural justice. We have to have the rule of law. Why is it that the sort of staff have been removed from their job, but the political people are sort of allowed to carry on?
Well, you're quite right. It's very bad for Rishi Sunak, because he, after the Boris Johnson years, he decided to stand on the steps of Downing Street when he got the job and talk about integrity, right? And talk about a clean sweep and making a fresh start in regards to standards in public life. So it's pretty bad for him that he's now dogged with this scandal that Michael Gove is comparing to Partygate. Indeed, I think, the thing is, it's very disappointing in politics. I don't know if you would all agree, but these double standards do happen when there's a question of tight numbers, right? I mean, we've all had evenings of being depressed about governments who call MPs back for a tight vote when they're supposed to be in disgrace and under investigation in Parliament.
Restored the whip in some cases as well.
Exactly. Theresa May, if I remember right, John will correct me if I'm wrong. I think Theresa May restored the whip to some very dubious characters when the votes were tight during the Brexit era. It's a poor show. It is very difficult if you're facing a terrible defeat, because if you remove candidates in places where you might squeak through, you're hurting your own numbers. But the choice you're making then is to look as if it is double standards. I mean, in Rochdale, of course, the Labour Party had that recent
Ali
experience.
Azhar, he was, and they threw
They
threw that seat.
Exactly. They took a tumble in order to be seen to do the right thing. But it did take a while, Ayesha.
Yeah,
I think,
that's
didn't
true.
It
took a very difficult Sunday morning news round with Pat McFadden going out on the Monday, on the Sunday morning round.
Absolutely. So I wonder if this story will build to a point that it's unsustainable to keep those candidates in place, or whether they think they'll just kind of style it out in some way.
The factual answer as to why the police officer is being treated differently, because I did this story and I remember reading the Metropolitan Police statement out on Sky News, is that he is being investigated for that offence that's called, I think it's improper conduct in a public office. So basically it's a breach of what he should be doing as a police officer. But I mean the
optics.
Yeah, the obvious answer,
Jon,
of course, is. I mean, you just played the clip of Mr. Sunak at the BBC Question Time. I was in the spin room and I interviewed Jonathan Ashworth immediately afterwards. And he was saying, it's all very well the Prime Minister saying that, why hasn't he suspended these candidates? Which, of course, is what Sir Keir was saying earlier on. The Liberal Democrats, meanwhile, have called for a Cabinet Office inquiry. No sign of that yet. So, I mean, the Prime Minister could have gone further. The trouble is, as Miranda says, and the candidate in Rochdale, the Labour candidate, of course, nominations had closed. The guy's name was on the ballot paper. And it's exactly the same here.
Yeah, but they could do what the Labour Party did, which is say, we're withdrawing our support from this person. And even if they win, they're not getting the Labour whip.
Yes, they could do.
They could do that. They could do that.